That is.
Are we recording? Do we need it all clear from them?
Just start. Michelle, does it get a countdown?
Good morning. The board workshop for December 13th, 2016 is now in session. Pam, roll call, please.
Mrs. Belford?
Present.
Mr. Craig?
Present.
Mrs. Deskovich? Mr. Susan?
Present.
And Mr. Ziegler?
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first order of business on this morning's workshop agenda are our legislative priorities. At this time, I'm going to turn the workshop over to Dr. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mrs. Belford, members of the board, and for the listening and/or attending public. Back on September 13, the staff, Nick Iarossi and crew from Capital City Consulting were here. We took input from the board, and we pledged to put together a legislative platform. And so the team from Capital City took that input, went back, and they're here this morning to present that to us. And towards the end of this presentation, as part of this initiative, Mrs. Stephanie Archer will be presenting what we're calling right now Project 2018, which is I'm going to call it piggyback on our legislative agenda. So with that, if Mr. Iarossi is ready, I'll turn it over to Nick.
We are. Thank you, Dr. Blackburn. It's a pleasure to be here. Scott Ross and I have put together a presentation for you to go through. I'd love to start off, if we could, just giving a little bit of an overview of the politics of the 2016 election. Last time we were here was in September, and it was obviously before elections, and a lot's happened since then. So maybe go over a little bit of what we see as potential impact from those elections before going into the presentation. So on the House and Senate side, it was actually a little bit, obviously on the presidential side with the Trump win, it was a rather surprising, I think, for many of the pundits out there who expected a Hillary victory, and especially by the margins that Trump won. And that, I think, is certainly going to have some implications on the education policy that's going to be pushed down to the states, and we'll get into that a little bit later when we talk about ESSA. But on the state level, more directly, it was also a very good night for the Republicans, better than expected. If you look at the House of Representatives, Republicans lost about a net 2 seats in the House, and the expectation going into the election was that they were going to lose about 6 to 8 seats. So losing 2 after redistricting was actually a pretty big victory for the Republicans. And the same thing on the Senate side. After redistricting, there was an expectation, if you guys recall, the Fair Districts amendment that was placed on the constitutional ballot and passed, rejiggered the redistricting process. The legislature passed redistricting maps, which were more friendly to the Democratic Party, but the courts didn't find those to meet the constitutional muster, so it went back and forth. The legislature tried drafting the Senate districts several times. The courts disagreed, and the courts actually ended up basically drawing the districts for the Senate in the end. So the expectation in the Senate was that the Democrats would pick up roughly 3 Senate seats, given the redistricting makeup. However, I guess really the Trump wave on election night carried the Republicans also on the Senate side, and they lost a net 1 seat. So if you look at the makeup of the Florida legislature right now in the House, you're looking at 79 to 41 Republican advantage, so nearly a 2/3 advantage in the House, majority Republican, and then on the Senate side, a 25-15 split. Our incoming leadership, this is going to really kind of dictate what the policy is going to look like over the next couple of years, is who our incoming leaders are. On the House side, we have Speaker Richard Corcoran. who is from Pasco County, a very, very staunch conservative. He's primarily about ending corporate incentives, cutting spending, cutting the size of government. I think he's going to really focus on those mantras as they move forward, and it's going to be very different from our incoming Senate President Joe Negron and his philosophies. He's from Martin County and has part of Palm Beach County. Senator Negron, President Negron, is a conservative, but also sees value in increasing education spending. One of his large initiatives is higher education, increasing that by $1 billion over the next 2 years. Investing in the environment. You guys have had issues here in regards to discharges out the estuaries and the algae blooms, and he's made that a priority to do more in the environmental side for water quality spending. So you're going to have this juxtaposition of the two sides, one wanting to just cut spending, cut government, and the other willing to spend in the areas of education, environment, and some other areas. So that's going to be a fight. And the rules that the House have set up around the budget has changed significantly too, and we'll talk about that a little bit later too, but that's also going to create, I think, a showdown between the House and Senate, and especially this first session as they try and work through these new rules and their philosophical differences is going to make for a lot of fireworks the first session. I'll be, I'm hopeful, but not convinced that a budget will be done on time during this regular session. We may be looking at a special session, given some of the differences we're going to be facing. Committee chairs. So yesterday, the House actually released their committee chairs, and I think overall the committee chairs are pretty good for education. On the House side, you have Representative Carlos Trujillo. He's the overall appropriations chair. He's a Republican from Miami. If you look at the Speaker's leadership team, Miami-Dade County did extremely well as far as the makeup of his leadership team. Manny Diaz, Representative Manny Diaz, is going to be the K through 12 appropriations chair, so he'll have direct oversight over K through 12 spending. He is an educator, has an education background. And then Mike Belecka, also a Republican from Miami, so 3 Miami Republicans are going to be overseeing education. Mike Belecka is going to oversee the Education Policy Committee. So you're going to, again, there's going to be a strong Dade County influence within that leadership team around education. There are 2 subcommittees, so there's going to be really 5 committees that are relevant in the House to our initiatives. There's a K through 12 innovation subcommittee, which when you look at our project 2018, that's going to be something that the innovation committee is going to be looking at. Chris Latvala is the chairperson of that committee. He's from Pinellas County, and he's also the son of Senator Jack Latvala, who's the Senate overall appropriations chairman. And then there's the 5th committee is called the K through 12 Quality Subcommittee, and that's going to be chaired by Representative Jake Rayburn, who's a Republican from Plant City. So that kind of makes up in the House. Interesting, in the House, there's, I think, 45 new members in the House. So there's 120 members in the House, and 45 of them are new. So when you start looking at from a lobbying perspective, many of these people haven't had to deal with education issues before, and over a third of them are new. So it creates some challenges as far as educating them on our issues. On the Senate side, as I mentioned earlier, Senator Jack Latvala is the overall education appropriations chairman. This is his 2nd stint in the Senate. He was termed out and re-ran for the Senate several years later. Very knowledgeable on issues across the board. I mean, he's a very bright guy. He's been around the process for a long time, knows how to play the politics as well as the policy. So he'll be the overall approach chair, and I see him being friendly toward public education. The Education Appropriations Chairman is Senator David Simmons from Orlando, who actually was Education Appropriations Chairman in the past in the House. He served in the House before moving to the Senate. So, Senator Simmons is very pro-public education as well. So I see that setting up well for us. And then our own now, Dorothy Huckel, Senator Dorothy Huckel, who's got a piece of Brevard, the northern piece of Brevard, is actually going to be chairing the Education Policy Committee in the Senate. So that bodes well for us as well, and we'll want to continue building a relationship with her, with this district, since Brevard is new to her. This is as part of redistricting that we talked about earlier. She picked up the very northern part of the county. Overall, if looking into next year, the budget scenario, this year we had about an $82.5 billion state budget. I think the governor is going to be crafting roughly an $85 billion proposed budget. As I said, the House is looking to cut. The Senate's looking to spend a little more than the House is on targeted projects. The State Board of Education has provided budget recommendations to the governor. And what happens right now, they're going through the process where the governor gets recommendations through these legislative budget requests, or LBRs as they're called. They review all the budget requests from the various agencies, and then the governor puts together a proposed budget that he releases just before the session. The legislature then takes that budget, reviews it, looks at it, and puts their own budgets together based on recommendations the governor makes, and then their own recommendations and their own priorities, and passes a budget for then the governor to review and sign or veto. And the State Board of Education did recommend that Governor Scott hold the line on the required local effort, which ad valorem has increased some, so there'll be a modest increase in required local effort if that occurs. And then they also recommended adding another $200 million to K through 12 K-12 education, which would result in roughly a 2.5% increase in per pupil spending for K-12 education. So that's the state board's recommendation, and I think the governor will recommend that, if not more, in his budget, based upon the conversations we've had with his staff at OPB. And then moving forward, scheduling-wise, the Senate's actually in committee week today. They started yesterday, so they're holding committee hearings today and tomorrow in the Senate, primarily organizational ones, and hearing presentations from agencies regarding jurisdictional issues, policy issues that are coming up. It's fairly high level this week. But and then after this week, they'll be off until January. In January, committee weeks will resume. There'll be 2 weeks of committee weeks in January, the week of the 9th and the week of the 23rd. And that's when they'll starting to dive into the issues and looking at bills. Bills are being filed every day right now, so we're monitoring every bill that's filed on a daily basis, looking for issues that might impact you. And then there'll be actually 3 committee weeks in February, the 6th, the 13th, and the 20th, those weeks. So they'll have 3 weeks there where they'll be voting on legislation and moving them through the committee process in anticipation of the 60-day session that starts on March 7th and will run through May 5th. So that's kind of, from a high level, where we're at right now as far as what the legislature looks like, what the budget situation looks like. The last thing I would add on the budget is that yesterday, our budget revenue estimators and state economist Amy Baker gave a presentation to the Senate where she said there has been a slight uptick in revenues, projected revenues for next year. We're looking at roughly $140 million increase in expected revenues, which is, I think it's 0.02% of the entire budget. It's a blip, but it's a positive blip at least. They were expecting revenues to be flat, if not decrease a little bit after the summer because of Zika and some of the other tourism-related problems that we had of people coming and visiting, but that's turned around some, so we'll at least be flat, if not a little bit positive, going into next year. So that's good news. The House still expects to have to cut $500+ million next year and the year after to make up for shortfalls in what they're anticipating in K-12 school enrollment growth and Medicaid growth and some other cost increases over time. So they're still going to be in budget cutting mode on the House side regardless, but I think the fact that the state economists are saying that we'll be a little bit positive next year is definitely a better scenario than we were expecting back in September when they gave us much more dire projections. So, and now we'll go into the slide presentation. I think we're going to start on slide 3. If you've got a clicker, Michelle, or if you want to. right there. Yep, I'll turn it over to Scott for this one. Are you gonna-
All right. Can you hear me? All right. So as we're developing our legislative agenda, one of the things that we do is we like to look at our overall strategy. And I think the first thing that we look at is when we look at a client, we look at branding. Sorry, can you hear me? Is that better? Is that on?
Yeah.
Better? All right.
You have to get close. You have to get close to it to register.
There we go.
It's your singing voice.
Yeah.
All right. Now I'm comfortable. As I was saying, when we look at assisting a client, the first thing that we look at is branding and how we brand that client. We want to be able to look at the client and talk about who they are, what they do, why they do it, and how they're effective at it. And one of the things that we're going to try and do is we're building relationships before there's an actual ask. So we're spending time in the off season, in the campaign season, traveling around the state, meeting with people, particularly in this case in the delegation, talking to them about Brevard Public Schools and what you do, how you do it, what the mission is, the leadership philosophy, and really giving them an overview of how everything works. Secondly, as we're developing our legislative agenda, as you know, you all tell us what you need, what your goals are, what you're looking to do. And it's our job to advise you as to strategically what are realistic goals. One of the things we talk about is we try and help clients make sure that they're looking at goals that are realistic and looking for things that can be done and ultimately getting to yes. A lot of times you'll have groups spending time, effort, and money going after something that's just not a realistic ask and that dilutes some of the things that they actually can get done. That's not meant to demean any goals or to say that things aren't important. It's just our job to put you in a situation or in a scenario where what you're asking for is realistic and we can get you to yes, and we can develop some deliverables for you. And then finally, lobbying in government affairs and success, it's about influence. And I think sometimes people use influence as a bad word. We look at influence more as building relationships and building something from the ground up where people can buy into your mission, believe in your mission, work with us in making sure that mission comes to fruition. And that's done through one, educating policymakers, making sure they know what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it, and also using people within the community or utilizing their skills. Sometimes some of the best advocates for what you're doing are going to be right here in Brevard County, and they're going to be, whether it's citizens, businesses, people talking about what needs to be done in Brevard County, talking to the local delegation, talking to the legislative leadership, and making sure they know what's important. So as we talk about the Brevard delegation, a little bit about the delegation. Brevard, frankly, you all have been very blessed with a fantastic delegation. Last year, or the last cycle, you had the Speaker of the House, you had the Rules Chair in the House, as well as some veteran leadership. Obviously, with term limits, some of those folks have left, but we're happy to say that you're still blessed with a fantastic delegation. And the great thing is we look at it, it's a younger delegation in terms of legislative service. So you have some people that are going to build upon a long legislative career and are eventually going to be in pretty high-level leadership positions. And we need to look at that as an opportunity because we're going to be able to build relationships with those folks from the beginning and let them know what we're doing and work with them. You also happen to have some veteran leadership here. Representative Goodson is going to be a high-level leader in the House. Senator Altman, now Representative Altman, has a lot of legislative experience and is now going back to the House of Representatives. Senator Uckel, who, as Nick mentioned, has a piece of Brevard County, is going to be the education chair in the Senate. So while building on that future leadership, you're also in a position where you're going to have folks who are at the table right now. So I think that there are some strong opportunities to get what we need done and to have a seat at the table, so to speak.
Yeah, and one of the things I would like to piggyback on with what Scott's saying is in talking with members of the delegation and even others that are involved in K through 12 education within the legislature, and as part of the branding effort that we do of reaching out and letting the members know that we're representing you guys and finding out what concerns are, oftentimes we learn a lot of intelligence that is going to make an impact on our ability to do our jobs. And we've learned over the last several months in meeting with people, we have some work to do with some of our delegation members. And there's one in particular that doesn't like the district. He's upset with the district that we've got work to do. And we've talked to Michelle and Dr. Blackburn about that. And it's under the previous administration, but and I'm confident that we'll probably be able to rebuild that. And Dr. Blackburn, with his personal skills, will be able to rebuild that. But we've got to work on that. We can't have any division within our delegation, or else we're really in trouble. We also have found that there are people who are new to our delegation that want to be helpful, that are actually upset with their previous school district and want to be helpful to our school district because they care about education, but they're upset at their own. So you find out, politics at the end of the day is very personal, and all these guys have different personal experiences with their school districts, and the more people you talk to, the more members you talk to and learn, the more ways you find ways that you can use that intelligence to our advantage. So with those, that's part of the way that we do business, and that's just pure shoe leather. It's just sitting down, having meeting after meeting after meeting, and talking through the issues and finding these things out. But there's some important things that we've learned that we need to fix, and also some that we need to build on. So. The slide 5, yeah. So there's been some staffing changes in the House and Senate that will influence education policy. I think one of the more disappointing things that will bring to your attention is the loss of Lynn Cobb. Lynn Cobb was in the Speaker's office and has been a powerhouse in K through 12 policy for decades, and she died tragically in a car accident last month. She's going to be, she's kind of an institution who has dedicated her life to K through 12 policy, and losing her is a big institutional loss for the legislature as far as setting policy goes, and also just a quality person. So there are some new people that came in this year to help with that. Joanna Hassel, who's going to be a staff director in the House, came from the Foundation for Florida's Future. You're going to find that a lot of the House leadership and the chairs as well as staff are very pro-charter school, very pro-school choice, and that's one thing that we're going to have challenges with on the House side. Denise Potvin is the new staff director for House Education Appropriations, and Denise we've worked with for years. She has been primarily in appropriations dealing with IT and government accountability, and has now moved to higher ed. She's incredibly bright, and I know she'll learn quickly. We met with her a few weeks ago on some of your issues, and she was already getting up to speed, but she's new to that role. And Teresa Clavajas is President Negron's policy education advisor. And then Shruti Graf is going to be the education policy person for the committee in the Senate. Tim Elwell will continue to be the appropriations staff director in the Senate. So he's been there for a while. So there's a little staff turnover that will also require us educating them on your specific issues as they come in and take these new roles over. And then the House rule changes. This is probably one of the most significant changes politically in decades, and will have an impact on how not only we do business with the House, but also how the Senate and House interact. The most significant one being that any member projects, so any requests for non-recurring funding or recurring funding, has to be done in an appropriations, separate appropriations bill. So in the past, oftentimes member projects, whether it be an appropriation for a park or an appropriation for a capital project for a school, or an appropriation, a supplemental appropriation for transportation and school bus purchases, whatever it might be, anything that's specific to a certain region for a specific amount of money asked for by a member was able to be done kind of by slipping it into the budget in a conference negotiation toward the end of the session. And the chairs have a lot of discretion to do those types of projects in the end as part of the negotiation, part of the horse trading back and forth. Well, this year, led by House Speaker Richard Corcoran, a new set of rules have been put into place that requires any appropriation for a special member project must be filed in its own separate bill and worked through the system. So it's got to go through the committees, be incorporated into the overall General Appropriations Act, and then passed by the House to be eligible to be placed in the budget. And it needs a bill, at the very least, needs to be filed in order to be eligible for conference negotiations at the end of the appropriations process. And this is an effort to add transparency and to have these projects vetted and not be slipped in at the last minute, or as he would say, in the dark of night at the end of session. So this is a very different process. It's, everyone's still trying to get their hands around and head around how this is going to work procedurally, because the Senate's not required to file a bill under their rules. So you're going to have a bill moving through the House that the Senate doesn't have a companion bill on, and it's mainly for transparency purposes, but it's going to be a procedural challenge, I guess. There are increased transparency requirements for lobbyists. We have to report every issue we're lobbying on behalf of every single client, every bill, every amendment, everything that we are working on the House side for clients. We have to report publicly. Our contracts, which are with public entities, including this one, are reported, although they're already public anyway. He wants them all placed on a database in a searchable format on the House website. This is the Speaker and his leadership team that put these rules together. No more flying on lobbyist jets. There's a bunch of different rules that the House has put in place. We don't own a jet, so
As you say, you have a jet?
yeah, we're okay there. No, yeah, we're okay there. So these new rules are definitely culturally a change. I mean, it's nothing that we have not already and will not adapt to, but I'm not as worried about the interaction between the lobbying corps and the House as I am the interaction between the House and the Senate on how the appropriations process will work in particular. And so when I said earlier, I'll be happy, but I'll be happy if it does finish on time, but won't be surprised if we end up in a special session this first session on budget as we work these things out. Okay, so slide 6, legislative plan. So we've got a focus on several things we'll talk about. One, we'll talk about briefly about ESSA and an update on the Every Student Succeeds Act. So I'm sure you've seen the U.S. Department of Education released their final rules a few weeks ago on student performance reporting and measurement. They did extend the deadline until next September that states have to submit their final plans to implement the rules, which I thought was interesting, given that now we have a new president who, just like our House and Senate leaders, feel that more control should be given to the states, and that in regards to assessment and measurement of students, that the ESSA requirements are overly prescriptive by the feds, and that states should have more discretion. So I don't, the reality is we are not sure right now how all this is going to play out, because with Betsy DeVos coming in as the education secretary under Trump, who's a big school choice and states' rights person, you may see, and we actually had lunch with a congressman yesterday who thinks that there's going to be a lot of changes within the first 6 months of the Trump administration, with Congress trying to pass rollbacks of various Obama initiatives, and probably this could be one of them, where we could see an amendment to ESSA that will provide the states with more control over assessment and measurement tools, which you combine that with the fact that our state leaders don't really agree with those ESSA requirements to begin with and feel they're overly prescriptive and are probably not in a hurry to adopt their standards. You may see that not going into place depending on what the Trump administration does. So that's going to be a little bit in flux. So we're going to be watching the ESSA implementation. We've met with the Board of Education folks on it. We've talked about some of the concerns we have regarding student assessment, and but I think that's going to be very fluid. That's going to be something we're going to need to watch here over the coming months. On assessment and accountability, the opportunity for students to utilize paper and pencil tests, that's going to be something that not only we're advocating for, but that other districts are advocating for. One of the things that we still need, I think, in order to effectively make arguments in that regard is what type of ROI and cost savings we'll get by allowing students to take the tests using paper and pencil. So if there is an ROI, could be that showing quite simply that some students do better in the written version of the test versus the electronic version. And ROI can also be cost savings if there's cost savings associated with it. But that's something that's something that we need in order to make those arguments.
Another issue that we've talked about is transportation funding. As it's no secret to you all that currently there's a deficit in transportation funds that you all have in order to bus your students. One of the things that's been talked about is ultimately changing the funding formula in order to meet the needs of the district. That's something that I think we can definitely talk about and discuss. I think we would need to find some partners in other districts to advocate for that as well. But another idea that we can talk about is a supplemental appropriation, at least to meet the temporary gap while we're working on changing the funding formula. Some of these big picture ideas, like changing overall funding formulas, they take some time, they take some advocacy, and they take really getting some buy-in from leadership. And that's something that we're obviously willing to spend time on and willing to advocate for, and something we need to advocate for. But ultimately, there's a short-term fix and a long-term fix, and one of our goals needs to be to put the district in a position where where you all can meet your financial needs or have your financial needs met, and while ultimately advocating potentially for a change in the funding formula.
And that, by the way, would require, if we were to do a supplemental payment, seek a supplemental appropriation, it would require a bill being filed. So we would need to get somebody from the delegation to file that bill, work it through the process under those new House rules. Amending the FEFP is just, it's a Herculean task because you have to get every school district signed on. Anytime you open the FEFP up, it's rife with disaster. So just to open that up for a supplemental or for an adjustment in a transportation funding for one school district is a very, very, very difficult thing to get done. So as we, if it gets opened up and transportation, particularly within the models being looked at, then it gives us the opportunity to do it. But to do it for one district there's going to be a lot of pushback there. So supplemental bill is probably the way to go there. Do we anticipate that the amount of funds that BPS will be spending will be similar to last year, the $6.8 million difference?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
That would be assuming yes, that would be assuming transportation level remains as is. If we were to implement corridor busing or some form of that, then that number would increase.
The other big initiative for us, and it's very obviously unique to this district, is the federally connected student funding. Scott and I met with education appropriations staff on this last month. There was some confusion about whether or not this funding was duplicative with the federal funding that we receive, because you've got it used to be that the feds kicked in $2.5 million. We received $2.5 million of the overall amount that the feds kicked in. They reduced that amount to $500,000 several years ago. In order to make up for that difference, the legislature kicked in the remaining difference to get to that original number to keep us at roughly $2.6 million. And there was some confusion among staff and the legislature as to whether they were adding federally connected student funding unnecessarily because we were receiving it from the feds. And I think, if I understand it correctly, Michelle kind of got us this information and we provided it to them, so I think we cleared up the disparity. And we did confirm that the State Board of Education did submit these numbers to the governor's office as part of their legislative budget request recommendation to be placed in the governor's budget. So I think we've cleared up that disparity right now. But
Can
this
you
is
clarify your understanding of that?
So my understanding is that, and please clarify it to me if I have it wrong, but my understanding is that currently we used to get $2.5 million from the feds. This district did for federally connected student funding. That amount of federal funding decreased over time to where we were only getting roughly $500,000 from the feds. The state then kicked in to make up the difference to get us to the $2.5 million, and that's what's currently going on.
The decline in that funding from the feds is what moved us towards getting this done. It has to do with the fact that you have all of this encumbered property off of the rolls and all these students that we're not getting compensated for in some form or fashion. And so it was designed to make up for that deficiency, not necessarily to a specific funding level, but just to kind of make up for that loss of revenue. And looking across the state at other counties that were in the same situation, basically being penalized for having so much military and federal and basically land off of the tax rolls. This is, as you know, something Thad Altman helped us with, big feather in his cap for his tenure. And the formula was, our staff helped really figure out a fair formula to compensate all counties relevant that fell into that category. So it wasn't necessarily designed to get to a specific funding level, but just to kind of be fair for compensation for that.
Right, and to make sure ultimately that there was funding, because our understanding was that the feds have been moving away from from that funding, and what I think it was Senator Gates and some of the other Senator Altman wanted to make sure that the district was able to provide for those students ultimately.
Exactly. And it was real more of a capital assistance.
Sure.
Although it came pretty much as a general fund assistance.
And the concern from education, or from staff, which Nick mentioned that we cleared up, was that, so there was a pool of money coming from the federal government, and there was a pool of money coming from the state, and their concern was to make sure that there was no double dipping going on, and that this wasn't an opportunity to just, to just find different sources of money and double up. What we were able to show them was the funding level is basically right around the same, and that the state is now just footing, I hate to use the term more of the bill, but we'll use it for now. The state is footing more of the bill than the feds are, but at the same time, this isn't some boondoggle that the district is going on.
Not at all, correct.
And so I think they understand that now, and we're in a position where they are, where they see what's happening, and I think we're able to successfully mitigate the duplicative funding argument.
Thank you.
Sorry if I could just, because I think it's critical that we all understand that. I know you're throwing out specific numbers, but I think that is part of the problem. When you start throwing out a specific number of 2.6 million or whatever, that means that there is a target. It is a formula that incorporates exactly what you just stated. So it's going to continue to fluctuate depending on whether the feds would put in more money if down the line they decided to, right? So that formula takes that all into consideration, and it was lobbied for, and this is critical too, as a capital appropriation for us, right? And so even though it came in through FEFP and comes in on the operational side, it's very important that I think our legislature understands that we have made a point to keep it on the capital side, because that is where we needed it. That's why we went to them for it, and that's where we've kept it. We have not put it back into operations. We have kept it on the capital side, so we've pulled it because we can pull from operation to capital. You can't go the other way, obviously, but we have made sure that we take that money and we put it over to capital. So I think it's critical that they understand that as well.
Absolutely, and I think the numbers that we're utilizing are more for, as an example, and were utilized to show staff that, hey, this isn't something where all of a sudden in the federal funding was at $2.5 million. Now all of a sudden, the feds are still giving $2.5 million,
Right.
and there's $4 million coming from the state, and all of a sudden they're saying, where is this going? This was a significant increase. We're able to show them that this is money that is necessary, this is money that is based on a formula, and this is money that is being utilized for the purposes that are outlined, and the district is being responsible with the funds.
Cool, thank you.
So that's where we're going with it.
I do have a question, though. Number one, I appreciate the comments because the messaging of this is important, and I understand the distinction of what I was saying and what you were saying, so thank you for that. The one thing, and this could even be a penny question, I don't know, but how is the formula calculated? Like, do we participate, from a process perspective, do we participate in calculating what that amount should be?
You're talking about the federally connected?
Yeah.
No, it's driven by formula at the state based on FTE and property values. There's a portion that is student-based, and then there's a portion that is property value-based, and they calculate it there.
Okay. And so that formula is the same for all eligible recipients?
Correct.
Okay.
And then on the impact aid, that's dependent on forms that are filled out by our students' families, returned in. We have to process them into about 4 or 5 different categories. It's very manual to get that $500,000. And 10, 20 years ago, we were getting 4 to 6 million, quite a bit much. The formula has been changed over the years. But right now, how much we earn depends on how much work we put into it. And let me tell you, we work hard to earn
Yeah.
$500,000.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you for that.
So something, excuse me, something that Superintendent Blackburn has talked about is Project 2018, which is a project that'll basically innovate and help educate students in high-demand careers and vocational careers, and really working with the community to develop a project to gain community partners and to build interest in what you all are doing here in Brevard. I think one of the things that you'll see is, particularly in the Senate, there is an interest in getting students into high demand careers, getting students who are college bound into careers that are technical, that are math based. And then getting students who may not be college-bound into vocational careers and into a place where they're going to have a life career versus just floundering and wondering what they're going to do. This is a project that I think is a long-term project, hence, as they named it, Project 2018. And it's something that I think we can develop buy-in with members of the legislature, but it's something that we need to start advocating for now. So. Something that we plan on doing during the session and before, as we talk to members of the legislature, let them know what this project is, let them know some of the community partners that you all are engaging. I think we talked a bit about advocacy from the community. I think something that's important will be getting some of those community partners to meet with members of the legislature and advocate for this project, because ultimately what we're going to be asking for down the road is funding. And we're going to have to show an ROI for that funding, and we're going to have to show to the dollar where this money is going. Something, as Nick mentioned in the House, with some of the budget changes that they're making, they're committed to being able to justify every dollar that's spent. There's really going to be a cut in what they call member projects. So we're going to need to be able to show that this is a worthwhile project and that this is something that's going to place students in long-term careers, keep them in Florida, and be able to build on our economy. And I think that's the ultimate goal, and I think that's what you're looking for. Just some, and finally, we really need to engage the governor in this. Governor Scott, obviously he's the jobs governor. He has committed himself to creating jobs. But I think he's also really pushed for some of these technical jobs and some of these in-demand jobs, and if we engage him and let him know what we're doing, I think he can be a strong advocate for us. And ultimately, he does write a budget. The legislature doesn't have to accept his budget, but I think he does have some influence. So I think a starting goal would be to try and get something like this in the governor's budget for 2018. Other legislative issues that we need to look at and follow. The recess legislation, the mandatory recess, is I'm sure you're all familiar with, mandating recess each week for students. Senator Uckel plans, our understanding is to file her financial literacy bill again, which would There we go. Senator Uckel. He'll be here all week, folks. Please tip your bartenders. Financial literacy legislation. Senator Uckel has filed that for the last few years, requiring a financial literacy course for students at the high school level. Public records legislation is also something that's always worthwhile for us to follow and that we're always following. Something interesting that I heard about at went to the Phil meeting last week. The school to jail pipeline, the Association of School Psychologists plans on filing a bill aimed at reducing the total number of out-of-school suspensions. And they want to mandate children seeing counselors, and they want to have school boards really address out-of-school suspension. So they plan on filing legislation. They didn't know who their sponsors were going to be or what the actual plan was, but it was a pretty heated debate at the Phil meeting. So they definitely plan on filing something, and we'll follow that and get back to you as soon as we know exactly what it looks like, and we'll be part of that conversation and would look forward to hearing your feedback on it. Of course, cost per student station has been a big issue for everyone, and Speaker Corcoran as well, and we're going to continue to address that.
Okay, some of the threats that we're going to be facing, or challenges that we're going to be facing this year, obviously testing and accountability is going to be one of them, capital funding, and also funding cuts. And more specifically, holding the required local effort steady is going to be that'll be a linchpin issue between the Senate and the House. I mean, the House is going to look to reduce the ad valorem on the required local effort to maintain a budget neutral amount of required local effort from last year. The Senate has already said publicly that they're willing to accept it as it's grown over the last year. So that's going to be one of those funding issues debated between the House and the Senate as we work out the budget. The cost per student station, as Scott mentioned earlier, is going to be a huge issue, that particularly in the House. Staff's already working on that. There is a study being done by the Office of Policy and Government Analysis, APAGA, where they're looking at what the cost of student station looks like for all of the districts around the state. They had started that work last year. They're refining some of that. The House is taking that information and looking at what to do going forward from a policy perspective in regards to cost per student station. That's going to be a hot topic. And then charter schools. We talked about, if you look at the leadership, particularly on the House side, they're very charter school friendly in the House. And overall, big time, I think you're going to see lots of attempts to increase school choice, increase the ability for charter schools to flourish in the state of Florida. And so those are some of the larger challenges we're going to be facing over the next couple of years that we need to be aware of. The Senate is going to be, I think, a pretty good counterweight to some of those positions, but the House is very philosophical on these education issues. When we look at targeting and trying to figure out the best way to maximize some of our priorities, though, and Scott was mentioning our Project 2018, that's precisely the type of project that the House is going to find very intriguing and innovative, and something that I think they're going to find a lot of interest in. So that's something I think over this next 2 years with this current leadership, we're going to be in a good position to push. And I think the Senate will look kindly upon it too, as well as, we mentioned the governor. So that's something I think we can really push for, because they're looking for new innovative ways to train our students entering the workforce, to improve the quality of students coming out of our high schools that can go directly into the workforce. And that project, obviously, that initiative would directly tie into that. So there's pluses and minuses from our district's perspective on some of these philosophical divides that we're going to face, but we got to maximize the good ones and try and mitigate the bad ones. As far as influence goes on slide 11, one of the ways that we want to do that is through utilizing the members of this board, and also utilizing community leaders who you identify who we think would be impactful with our delegation and with legislative leaders in general, both through grassroots and grass tops advocacy. There are partner groups out there that we can work with, but some of the best ways that we can really influence our delegation is having you guys active and having leaders in the community active. And we'll rely on you really to tell us who outside of this group is also potentially impactful as community leaders with our district members. And it might be some of the members of the business industry that you're talking to for Project 2018 who can reach out. I mean, you have you're one of the most unique communities in the state of Florida with the amount of industry and business that you have here that's has such a big impact on the state. So utilizing them and members of this board to really be in the ear of our legislative delegation, and beyond that, if we have relationships there from the community, will be an integral part of trying to be successful in those areas.
So just to reiterate and close, and then we'll open it for questions. It's going to be an exciting 2 years, but it's going to be a challenging 2 years. Before the little uptick in budget in budget revenue that Nick mentioned, and I think they're still projecting over the course of the next 3 years they're projecting there will ultimately be a budget deficit. We have a new House Speaker who is committed to cutting. His leadership philosophy is cutting spending. He has directed his budget team to cut. Our Senate President is committed to higher education and making Florida some of the top universities in the country. If you listen to his designation speech as well as his election speech, he wants to see the state of Florida have universities that compare with those in Virginia and North Carolina and keep some of our best and brightest students here. And to do so, he's willing to spend an increase of close to $1 billion. And the other challenge is, as Nick mentioned several times and we've talked about, the charter school message has resonated with a lot of the conservatives in the legislature, particularly in the House. So I think we've been pretty clear that we're not against charter schools. We think charter schools have a place at the table, but we need to make sure that the public education, our public schools are protected, and that our message continues to resonate, and that we're here to provide an important, if not the most important service in the state of Florida. So, and we're going to continue to drive that home and continue to tell the story of Brevard's successes and some of the things that you're doing. We'll now open it for questions.
Board members? Mr. Ziegler.
I've got a few different topics to touch back on, and I don't want to just waltz through them because other board members may want to chime in, but I want to first start with the assessment, the point of paper and pencil. Obviously, very astutely, you want an argument for that, and you asked for one as far as return on investment, as far as what is the savings. Now, maybe staff can put a number to that, but I don't exactly see it that way. I see the argument more of one of efficiency in our schools. We have a challenge with the computer-based assessments in that we don't have enough technology, and those assessments roll out over weeks, interrupting delivery of curriculum. And I don't know if we've ever measured that interruption, but even to the point where you have classes that typically on a daily basis would use the technology, now they can't use the technology because it's going to be used for testing, so those classes are interrupted. You have students coming in and out of classes to do their testing. The remainder of the class is off their regular curricular path. And so one of the questions that I've brought up before, which again I don't know if we've measured, is I believe the statute that requires a certain amount of curricular delivery over the course of the year to promote. I'm concerned, and this probably exists in all school districts who have this challenge, that we're not meeting those curricular hours because we're interrupting for 2 or 3 weeks and therefore violating that requirement. So I think there's just a lot of negativism, not negativism, there's a lot of negative to the computer-based testing because we just don't have the capacity to do it. I think there's too much disruption to the schools that is just unacceptable. Obviously, we can't correct that with capital funding. The state can't correct that with capital funding. So in lieu of being able to just knock everything out in just a few days, we can, with technology, we can probably do that, as I understand it. Staff may be able to quantify better, but as I understand it, with paper and pencil, we can test everybody a lot quicker, get it out of the way, and get back to business. So I think that's an important argument, I think, but staff can chime in on that.
I think that goes to the overall argument. One of the things that Nick mentioned was there's several different kinds of returns on investment, several different types of ROI. ROI can be higher test scores. ROI can be a financial return on investment. Efficiency, as you mentioned, can be an ROI. What we were looking for, and I think you've just given us a pretty good start, we're looking at different arguments to be able to present an ROI, and I think that this will go to the heart of that we're able to sit with the policymakers and explain the lack of efficiency that is being utilized in the process of forcing students to take the tests on technology. And I think one of the things as they mandated that, or as they put that into place, I think they probably thought that technology always creates more efficiency.
Of course.
Technology is always more efficient, and it's always better. It makes us perform better. But as with a lot of things with technology, things sometimes get lost in translation, and you have some unintended consequences. So I think what you've given us is a pretty good start in terms of being able to articulate another form of an ROI.
The other thing I would add to that is we have had discussions with House and Senate staff about this particular issue. There is a recognition that there's not enough technology to meet the needs to efficiently test everyone. I mean, you've got schools rotating students through a limited number of computer stations to be able to take tests and scheduling. And it's a nightmare, right?
It is a nightmare.
They understand all that, so I do think that they thought that it was going to be more efficient when they first passed this. To Scott's point, they realized that putting it into practice is much more difficult than expected, given the lack of overall technology stations or computer stations to be able to take the testing. So this movement to allow for the option of paper and pencil testing is gaining some traction because of that logistical recognition of shuffling students in and out. So, but yeah, from an ROI perspective, especially if we're having difficulty potentially meeting our statutory requirements of a certain amount of testing, a certain amount of teaching, utilizing the technology, because it's locked up for so long, cycling students through to take these tests, that's an issue. I think they're starting to hear the concerns. So.
And just so we're careful in what we're asking for, because sometimes if you don't clarify, they might then say, oh, well, what if we funded more student stations? Mm-hmm. And so the first thought is, okay, how many student stations do you need times $1,000 per stage or something like that? Mm-hmm. That's not the entire cost to implement more stations. There's the infrastructure, there's the inadequate power outlets in the classroom because we have 50-year-old schools. There's tremendous ancillary costs associated with the piece of equipment to make it operational in our environment. So we got to be careful they don't come back with, well, here's money, go buy some equipment, because we still can't afford the capital cost for the
Yeah, the
infrastructure.
capital improvements, yeah. Thank you.
Mr. Susan, I think you had a comment?
If they
I see your
compared
hand up.
the capital cost versus the cost of the actual paper and pencil, because that's what they're going to do, they're going to say, well, if you take it online, here's the savings and here's your paper pencil. They're not going to go back to the capital. When you do that comparison, the paper pencil is much cheaper. But what they'll try to do is make that other argument. There's plenty of documentation out there that certain people just test better on paper and pencil. I did it for the LSAT. When I took the LSAT, I requested it to be on paper and pencil. I mean, that's just a bottom line. The other thing is that we have to be careful because our Palm Bay High School reduced their testing by 13 days, which means there's other schools inside the district that have more curriculum time than other schools, which creates there's, you see what I mean? Somebody can argue that their kids are not getting the same education as the ones over there and then sue. So we got to be careful of that.
Good points.
Mr. Craig.
I think Mr. Ziegler made some great points, but I think it is imperative that we have the metric. We have to have something hard and fast that we can bring and show on paper. I know there are schools that do track efficiency. I know I sat with Lori Spinner over at Jefferson a couple, probably not this year, but the year before, and she knew exactly how much time had been taken out of the day for students, and had that down to the hour basically. We need to make sure we have that information as a takeaway, so that when we go and we present this, we're like, here's the actual cost. So it's not just financial, and you're right, but we can't talk in generalities about efficiencies unless we truly show the ROI of that efficiency and why it's important. And without numbers, you know that. I mean, they want to see numbers. That's what they want to see. They don't want to hear your opinion. We want to see the numbers, and without that, without us doing that as a district, I think we're just kind of, dogging a kitchen floor, because
I agree 100%. And numbers and methodology, really.
Exactly.
And so I agree, and that would be wonderful.
I know I'm preaching to you, but I'm looking at Dr. Blackburn, like, we need to have that. We need to at least have a core group of numbers that we can take to them and go, look, here's a sampling across our district of the efficiencies that are lost due to this type of testing.
And to Member Susan's point too, even if it's certain schools are reducing their number of teaching days by 13 days. I mean, that's, I think it was the example you used, that's significant. So showing that type of impact makes a big difference in our arguments too.
I think the data point, loss of core instructional hours due to having to shut down computer labs or things of that nature.
In the rotation of teachers or monitors and all that.
That can be quantified.
Yeah.
I would add to that, Dr. Blackburn, that the reality of the testing schedule in schools is not only limited to the students that have to rotate into the computer labs, obviously the technological challenges, but I think the impact to all of the students in the school, because in addition to just those who are directly impacted by our testing schedule as a result of the requirement for technology, we also have students that are not allowed to go to recess during testing because they make too much noise for the people in the testing room, so they don't get recess. We then have behavioral issues because kids aren't able to get out and burn off some of that energy. So more difficult to quantify, but I think important to have it a part of the conversation. When we look at the loss of instructional time or instructional impact might be a better way to phrase that. Those students who are no longer getting to do their normal day and burn off that energy and talk in the cafeteria and have to be quiet in the halls, all of that impacts their ability to take in the instruction that may be being delivered in some of the classrooms where they can, working around that technology issue. So, Ms. Deskovich.
And at the high school level, the children are pulled from the class to test, and the teacher probably doesn't want to introduce new material when half the class is testing, taking an EOC for a class that's at a different time slot. So the impact is just endless.
And then also we have facilitators, and I know we have staff that has a core responsibility that gets pulled from that for a couple of weeks to be test facilitators, and that puts them behind the 8 ball, so like counselors who are overloaded to start with. We probably need more of them, and we're pulling them for now test facilitators.
Mr. Souza?
There's one more to look at is also our curriculum time has been reduced as compared to some of the other states. So when we try to argue that our kids are going to go compete for higher end jobs in some of the Ivy League schools or somewhere else, we lose out because our kids are actually in a less of a curriculum time than they do. So states like New York and other states that don't test at the same schedule that we have and they don't lose, that's another way to look as far as a global competitiveness.
Yeah, which is that the global argument about competitiveness is most of those countries that are doing better than us, they have more
Right.
curricular hours, significantly more.
And so
And
how
we're
are we supposed to
reducing
compete?
curricular hours.
And that's just it. I mean, it just all the way across, so.
Yeah, so, next item?
Any other board members have comment? Miss,
On this topic,
Mr.
but then we
Wright.
go to
Oh, on
other
this
ones.
topic?
On this topic.
okay.
Got
Mr.
one.
Ziegler, you have another?
I wanted to touch on Project 2018 and get some legislative guidance from you all a little more specifically. So you referred to this project as fitting into some of the agenda with the legislature and the governor. But I wanted to see if we could narrow down a little more specifically, because in your comments you stated to the desire to have more opportunity for high school to career. Project 2018 isn't really entirely about that. We have another effort on that. So I wanted to know, do you feel that from the state's agenda perspective that they have more focus on high school to career, high school to college, both equally? What do you think?
Yeah, I would say it's a good question. I would say both equally, and here's why. I think the prevailing sentiment, particularly in the House, but also in the Senate, is that we're shuffling a lot of students to college, and some of which who, if they had training coming out of high school with some certain type of vocation, could enter into the workforce and are maybe more suited to go straight from high school to the workforce versus going to college. So I think there's an emphasis both equally. And on Project 2018, it was and maybe I misunderstand the way that this program's supposed to work, but it was my understanding that there was a little of both.
There is.
Tied into 2018. So you've got high school students who will be interning with various industries around this area, who maybe find us not only a skill set, but maybe something of interest that they really enjoy. And if they're if college isn't the pathway that they should go, then they've got an entry point into the workforce here that they may not have had Project 18 not been part of their curriculum. Others may be going and doing these internships and realizing they want to be a space engineer and are going to go into that field and pursue, higher education all the way through graduate and doctoral degrees because they participated in this program and it awoke something in them that they didn't know previously existed. So, I would say equal emphasis, and if that's what Project 18 is about, then I think that increases its likelihood of success with the legislature.
To continue on that specificity of what may be on the agenda, do you think there's more appetite for funding for programs, for existing facility upgrades, or large capital asks for very focused, it's like a career high school or something of that nature, kind of like Duval has or Polk has with their aeronautics high school? What do you think? And unfortunately, sometimes we think very conservatively in an ask for getting done what we want to do, but I'm wondering if maybe we need to shoot a little higher, but of course understanding the desire of the agenda might help us focus our ask.
That's a very good question. I think that, and Scott can chime in here too, but to me, programs would probably take priority with this legislature over capital expenditures. I think if you get money to get this program really up and running and making it successful, and then being able to a few years down the line show the success of the program, then it's not unrealistic to come back and ask for capital money, maybe to build out to support some of the programs. But getting capital money first without evidence that this is working will be a much more difficult ask. So I would say programs first.
Okay, excellent, that's important.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Mr. Craig? Did you have no, next one.
I'll
Oh,
go.
you have a comment on that one?
No,
Mr.
well, I was just going to, on 2018. So you identified key partners and stuff like that. Our House leadership's not too keen on the EDC and stuff like that. Would we keep those people out? Our Economic Development Council's phenomenal, but the question is he's getting ready to defund them and everything else. What kind of key partners inside the community are you looking for? And I got a couple other ones, so if you can.
No, good question. Although the House Speaker and really his whole leadership team is trying to get rid of EDC funding and corporate incentives overall, I wouldn't underestimate the value that that private sector folks, particularly in your district, have with members of the legislature. So they don't believe in corporate incentives, but they do believe that those corporate entities and the leadership in those corporate entities are vital for the success of Florida. So their opinions on things are gonna matter substantially. Now, if they're coming to ask for a corporate incentive for something, no, that's
Right.
they're going to be told no. But getting those CEOs, presidents, executive vice presidents, top
Grumman,
brass-
Embraer, all of them.
100%.
Okay.
Those brands are gold in Tallahassee. They're going to take the support from those brands very seriously in Tallahassee. So getting those folks as grass tops and community partners for 2018 is vital to its success.
Okay.
And Dr. Blackburn has been doing a great job of already engaging those leaders and some of the board members. So we heard you loud and clear last time you were here on that.
Great.
Mr. Craig?
I just had two quick questions. First, you mentioned the financial literacy bill. I'm not super familiar with it, but I do know that this county has an extremely proactive junior achievement group that actively promotes financial literacy through the schools, and I can't remember the number of students they touch, but it is in the thousands, obviously, where they're getting a weekly class in financial literacy. Do you have any idea how that ties together? Is there any tie that says that the district has to provide for it, or can an outside entity do that?
My understanding of the legislation as it was filed the last couple of years is it would be Senator Uckel wanted, and it was Representative Fitzenhagen in the House, wanted an actual class in the school to provide financial literacy education. Now there has been discussions about what that looks like, who would teach it, are there private sector partners, banks, credit unions, groups that could work with the schools to do it. And I think some of those groups have stepped up and said they'd like to be helpful, but there was no particular tie-in with groups like Junior Achievement. She was pretty clear that she wanted actual classroom time.
Well, this is classroom
yeah.
time. I mean, it is weekly hour classroom time. It's just not provided by the district. The only reason I ask is if you could just maybe file that in your head and keep us updated as that goes, because I think we're a little bit different than some of the other counties in the extent of the engagement of junior achievement here, especially in the financial literacy area. I just want to make sure that we don't lose that capability.
100%. That's a good point, and what we should probably. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Blackburn. Were you going to say something?
What I was going to add to that is maybe as a subsection to that, as you're advocating for us, just a reminder that there are more than one ways than just a credit hour in a class to provide the same rich experience. So giving the local school district options
Flexibility.
in order to make that happen would be great.
100%. That's a great point. That's one of the things I was just going to say is that what we should probably do even is have Senator Huckel come sit down with us, and we'll explain it to her here before the next round of committee weeks come up. Unfortunately, I'm not speaking out of turn because she disclosed this publicly, but she's undergoing cancer treatment right now. She didn't make it up for this committee week, but depending on how she feels, meeting here in Brevard would probably be a great option where we bring her in here, to meet everybody, but also to talk that through. Because that's, I think, a perfect example of a way that we can provide some type of flexibility in the bill for what's already going on that probably people aren't aware of, and provides flexibility for the district to have a third party come in and provide that type of financial literacy education.
Mr. Susan.
And there's one class that's already set into the high school. It's career and readiness. And they've literally got, it's not well run. So that could be a perfect place to just drop it right in rather than recreate the wheel. And it's usually in 9th grade, and they have all the kids coming in, which would be perfect to set up. And you can bring in a private industry and tie it in.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, they're just geared on trying to find what career they want in their lives, and usually they just end up watching a bunch of videos and stuff like
Okay.
that. So that'd be a perfect place to put it.
But yeah, having Senator Hugh come in, and we need to have her. I mean, we have so much when we talked about the grassroots efforts anyway, and getting the board involved. We have so much. She's chair of the committee of education policy in the Senate. I mean, we really need to take advantage of that. She's right here. You know, she's got part of our. I mean, she's north of here, but she's got the north part of the county, and and we need to utilize that. And she's reached out and said that she wants to get more involved in Brevard at the district level and just with the county as a whole, because it's new to her representation. So.
And going forward, Mayfield's the vice chair, which
Yeah.
is the other end of the county. So if Huckel's not in there, Mayfield's in there too, so we should just do the same thing for her.
Probably just have them both come together would be,
Yeah.
and do a sit down and go through some of these things.
Just to clarify a little more on Mr. Craig's point about JA, because it means what you said the conversation was, in that includes our financial partners in the community, our banks in the community. It also, JA also already has established defined curriculum for the different grades, which is working very well. And then when you have people from the community coming into the schools, that really adds some excitement in a classroom. So it's really a great dynamic that solves exactly what that statute wants to. So that flexibility for us to be able to partner with an organization like that, I think would move that along a lot quicker and be more successful.
And is
That's a
is
good
it a
point.
mandatory class, and for how long?
No, it's
Yeah.
not, JA is not necessarily a mandatory class. It is.
Not JA, but the career and technical, or the career classes.
You're- the one you were
But the
talking about
junior
is-
achievement integration into is school dependent. But I would say that the participation rate is very high. I looked at Dr. Blackburn. I'm not sure exactly what the participation rate is, but and it is a semester-long class, so it's not just come in for 1 week. It is the entire semester, and and it's accredited. Yeah.
So it's an elective, basically.
No.
So,
It's
so junior
incorporated
achievement's
into an
an
existing
organization,
course.
Okay.
and the
Yeah.
career
Exactly,
class
it's
is a
incorporated.
class. Junior achievement comes in and helps in other things. That career thing's totally separate.
Okay.
If you have questions, I'm currently a JA teacher. I'll leave here today and
Awesome.
I'll go over to Viera High
Are
School.
you? Okay.
I'm in
Perfect.
the career class.
Okay, perfect.
and
Yeah,
I-
you can explain it to me. Great.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
I'd be happy to talk to you later.
Thank you.
Just one thing I wanted to touch on. First of all, your comments on branding were music to my ears. That was awesome, because that is exactly what we need. We need to have, that's the way I view it, is Brevard Public Schools is a brand. And when you start talking about the charter and choice schools, and I agree with you, obviously that's kind of the, momentum changes, obviously, every few years. That's kind of the direction we're going. I don't see it as a threat, because I think we are the best choice. So my question is, how do you see us best branding ourselves as pro-choice, as a pro-choice organization? If you look at the demographics and the amount of charter schools per student or whatever, we're very low compared to probably most other counties, especially some of the bigger counties. And it's because we have such a historical great system. So how do we make sure that we get that message across, that we are already offering choice? And as we look forward to something like Project 2018, do you see it as something that we need to even look at creating our own charter school within the system, which has been done obviously in other places in the state for a variety of reasons, both from a financial standpoint, but also from a perception standpoint? Do you have any experience with that?
Interesting. So number one, I like I like the message of we're not afraid of the competition because we're such a great district that we have a low participation rate and students going to charter schools because of what we offer. And then the message of on 2018 is just adding another piece to compete, right? To provide better education experience for our students that's going to, again, drive down that rate of our district students entering charter schools. So number one, I like it because I think that's something that the legislature will respond to, of we're not afraid of competition and we're going to sit here and compete for our students. And we don't oppose choice because we're not afraid of it because we have a superior product. I mean, I like that. And I think that ties in well to the 2018 message. So being aggressive with that message, I think is, A, shows that we're not afraid to compete, B, that we're going to be innovative to compete, and C, recognizes the current political dynamic that these guys want competition. I mean, the reason why they're pro-charter school isn't because they're anti-public school. It's because they feel as though to keep the public school system competitive and innovative, there needs to be a choice. That's their philosophical belief. So for us to take that head on and say, yeah, we get it, and here's what we're doing, and this is why we've been so successful, I think is a great message. And Michelle, on the PR side, we can work on some tagline. Well, I guess whoever the predecessor of Michelle will be. Unfortunately, we're losing a very good PR person, but whoever. That's right. There we go. Yeah, Michelle's firm, right? Whoever we're gonna be dealing with on that. I think coming up with a tagline about that is great, and I think messaging some of that out. When members of the board talk to members of the press. I mean, I don't think we need to be issuing press releases and smacking people in the face with it, but I do think that you all are public figures. You talk to the press all the time. Building that into your rhetoric as you speak to members of the press that, hey, look, we understand the legislature is very pro-competition, pro-school choice, and we welcome it. We're not afraid of it. We don't oppose it. We're just going to continue to offer better programs, better options so that people don't move to charter schools. We welcome the competition. That's a great message. I like it.
However,
And as far as setting up your own charter school, probably too early to tell there. You may not have to. I mean, as 2018 develops, and if this program is a success, you may not have to create a separate charter school to compete, but just the recognition that you guys are providing innovation just through the normal public school system creates probably less incentive of a need for it. So that's probably a wait and see.
Thanks.
I think it's important to define competition, though, because what we've been seeing a lot is unfair competition, where the charter schools are set up with exemptions to things that we're required to do. So competition exists on an even playing field. Mm-hmm. And we're fine with that. We've got no problem at all. But when you start giving exceptions to them to give them the edge, then that's a problem. That's no longer competition. The capital conversation is clearly still alive and is going to probably go somewhere. And we need to clarify what is fair and equitable from a capital perspective. And I'm going to talk from my own opinion, but I've spoken to some charter operators who, of course, would love to have capital funding. And one of the concepts that the state has been bouncing around is a $250,000 to your charter schools in the county. That's not a fair in a small county, and that's probably not fair in a large county. It needs to be more of a formula on a per student basis. I personally think that every student in a county is entitled to some capital money towards their education. The question is how much and how is that capital money used? One of my biggest concerns, and I've expressed this to capital operators, is giving capital money to a charter operator who has their own facility. They own the facility, and of course, some of their equity in their business is grown by paying their mortgage, of course, which is fine. But to take capital money and improve their facility, take public money, improve a private facility, is an issue. Yet, the children in that school do have, in my opinion, have some right to capital money for their facility. So how do you handle that? And I suggested to them, what if there was a lien on the property for whatever reasonable time period that capital money should service those children. Maybe it's like 10 years of a declining lien. And the charter operators are like, yeah, that's fine. In which case we can swallow that. But there needs to be a fair and equitable way of capital to charter schools. Not saying, okay, we're going to take, because if you take a $250,000 in Brevard County for, say, 10 charter schools versus a $250,000 in Broward County for 100 charter schools, it's just, it's a big disparity, and also proportional to the per-student capital funding in the public system versus the charter. There needs to be an equitable solution to that conversation and a fair solution to using capital money, public funds, if applied to a private facility. So we're not opposed to that fairness, but that's got to be part of equal competition. It's got to be even playing field.
Another topic. So going back to the House and the Senate, and these bills that the House has to go ahead and come up with, are there going to be any like PCBs or shell bills or anything that are coming out? You going to see any of that?
I don't think so. I mean, I think under
You
the
think it's gonna
new,
tighten
I mean,
that tight?
there will be committee bills on leadership-driven
Right.
projects, but in regards to specific appropriations requests, it's going to be
It's gonna be
a
up
member, what they want is a member to put their name
Yeah.
on the bill, so it won't be committee bills on those specific projects.
Will they hold in bill drafting, not let it get a bill number until the last minute, or no? And then
Yeah,
are
who
they,
knows on that one?
and then will they be able to take those bills if they're not voted down and throw them on to another bill as an amendment, do you think? See what I mean?
Yeah, if the bill is filed,
Mhm.
it's eligible for conference
Okay.
to be placed in as a project. However, the way I understand, and all this is kind of
I know, that's what I was
being worked
trying to
out, so
figure
it's a
out.
little, it's procedurally, we're unsure how it's all going to work. But so the way it's supposed to work, ideally, is that on a member project, a member files a bill, their
Right.
name's on it. It's going to go to the subcommittee. In this
Right.
instance, it would be the K-12 education subcommittee. Get a vote there.
Right.
Then it goes to the full appropriations committee. It's voted on there and then incorporated into the General Appropriations Act, then goes to the floor, votes off the floor, and then you get into a conference position. The way that can also act, apparently, is that as long as the member project is filed in a bill before session and never gets a hearing, it's eligible to be placed in the General Appropriations Act in the conference process.
Gotcha.
So after the bill passes the House,
Yep.
it can't be put in there, right? It didn't get through committees.
Right.
But during conference back and
They can
forth,
pull it.
a senator's eligible to make the offer.
At the
And the
last minute.
House, and that House is allowed to accept the offer in conference as long as it was filed as a bill. And the rationale there is that it was filed as a bill, therefore it was out there for 2 months, transparent, people could look at it, make criticisms, et cetera, even though it never received a hearing.
So that's where they're going to go. Okay. Thank you.
I know there are still lots of questions, but I just want to do a check-in with the board members. We are currently just before 11 o'clock. Ms. Archer has about a 30-minute presentation, and I think the conversation that we're having is very good, very productive, and very much needed. But I also want to be respectful of commitments that you all may have had post-workshop. So I just wanted to do a check-in. Is there anyone that needs us to restrict discussion so that you can make another
I'm
commitment?
scheduled for a tour of can that be postponed?
Yes, that's
fine.
it's flexible.
And then at 12, I have to be at Vera for junior achievement class, but other than that.
Okay. Mr. Sousa,
My
Mr.
tour
Craig,
can
you
be
good?
shifted too, so we're good.
Okay, very good. Additional questions from board members on the legislative priorities?
I just have a high-level question. So when you're lobbying on our behalf, I see the testing, right, the assessment and accountability, the transportation funding, but then it goes into Project 18. Is that are these things, I'm much more of a like 1, 2, 3. What 3 things are you going to argue for us? And then there's the other legislative issues. Are those just random things to keep us informed about, or are those things you're asking on our behalf? I'm a little confused.
Yeah, so the first ones are more specific to the district, including the transportation funding, but then we're working on all these issues with the recess legislation, the reading instruction, the financial literacy, the public records bills, the cost per student station, overall funding in the FEFP, required local effort, all those things we still...
Working on, you're just gathering information, or you're saying
No,
we
actively
support
lobbying
these?
members. Yeah, actively lobbying members. So, for example, the FEL meetings, like Scott was saying that he attended, all the school districts work together as a coalition on like-minded issues. And a lot of these are going to be like-minded. Some are going to be Brevard specific, but a lot of them are like-minded. So everyone teams up, divides up the legislature depending on relationships, on delegations, et cetera, and tackles it, because there's 160 members of the legislature.
So if there were items on here we didn't agree with, or a bill we didn't support, where did this come from? I'm new, obviously, so did this
That's okay.
group come
We
up the board?
developed it.
You developed
Yeah.
it before?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would just add also, there are items that you're not going to agree with, and part of our role is going to be to defeat that legislation. So there are some things in there that you're going to see that you're going to want us to advocate for, and then there are going to be things that come up, some that are on that list, some that haven't been contemplated yet, that when you get together, you're going to say, this is really bad for Brevard County Schools, and we need to try and defeat this. And so then part of our mission is going to be to try and defeat legislation and tell policymakers why it's bad for Brevard and why it's not something that they should be implementing.
Right, but the items on here, Misty, you're saying we've said we support?
Not on the other legislative issues.
That's
So
the ones I'm
basically,
looking
what
at.
we did,
Okay.
the initial issues that they presented on the transportation funding,
Okay.
that was part of our legislative priorities
Makes
that we
sense.
discussed with them when they initially came on board. The other issues are issues that we need to anticipate being potential issues for us so that we can continue to keep an eye on and work on. So the Project 2018, the transportation funding, and the testing and accountability, those are things that
Got it.
we ask them to advocate for on our behalf.
And the
Yeah,
federal.
I'm sorry, we
And
didn't, so
federally connected.
when we talked about it, we didn't say, whether we're for or against those issues when we went through them. We were just identified them as issues. In addition to these, like some of these were for, some of these were against, we'll be advocating for or against, or to modify. For example, we talked about the financial literacy bill and maybe tying in, especially after I learned about junior achievement from you, tying in what you guys are already doing locally in the schools to what that bill contemplates, and hopefully, making that part of the solution.
Well, it's the recess bill that I'm looking at. All children need recess, absolutely, but
Yeah.
I think as a district, we need to decide.
Agreed, and
I
that's
don't want the
mandated
state-
hours.
Right,
So
I
we
don't like the
oppose it,
state
right.
mandating hours. So I wanted to know if that was something we already decided we
Yep.
were supporting, or you all were going to go up and lobby for, and I want to say no, so.
At the FEL meeting, most districts are coming out against it.
Okay. That's what I'm
Because of
saying.
flexibility, right? For what you just said, you should decide the number of recess hours. The state shouldn't be dictating 20 hours a month, which is what the bill does.
That's how I
Yeah.
feel personally, but I didn't want to speak on behalf of the board without.
And
discussing.
correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that presented by Coach P, our new delegation? Isn't he supporting that legislature? Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's Senator Flores in the Senate who is the president pro tem. And
Very
a
powerful.
Significant member of the leadership team.
So it has strong support.
absolutely.
I will say, however, though, Tina, Coach P seems to be willing to have conversation around what that really looks like, like looking at the base intent. He's passionate about making sure that we provide that opportunity, but I think he's open to input as to what that looks like in practice.
Well, I think it's frustrating because I know other districts in the state have a real problem with this. I don't know the problems we have in our districts. I haven't heard a lot of clamor, and I think I would have on the campaign trail. So I just hate to be micromanaged if we're doing it well.
Right.
And if I could, one of the things after this workshop, staff and I, along with Capital City, will work on is a very condensed one-pager, if not less than that, leave behind with high level where Brevard stands and maybe one or two specific talking points per high level area, and so that we're all speaking from the same.
If we had something that said, look how great Brevard is, we have recess in all our schools, we do this, I don't know if that's information that you can pull easily.
Perhaps.
Maybe they can make the law for everyone but Brevard.
Yeah, and to Dr. Blackburn's point too, one of the things to keep in mind is we kind of just identified what we believe the issues are going to be based upon intelligence we've gathered and from previous years. But bills are being filed now. I mean, there'll be like 20, 30 bills filed every single day we're going through. There will be well over 100 education bills that we're going to have to track and watch for any issues that may impact you, and then amendments to those as we move forward. So all this is really, really fluid. We will know the first part of March, the first week of March, when the bill filing deadline finally comes about. what the full landscape looks like right as session's starting, and we'll have a condensed document too that's even more thorough of what to expect. So these are issues we know and some that we anticipate, but it's going to be fluid because right now it's going to be changing for the next couple months as bills are filed.
Mr. Ziegler.
You alluded to the power of us getting involved and speaking to our legislators as opposed to just letting you take the ball. We also heard that message a couple weeks ago at FSBA from Senator Latvala, Simmons, and Munford. So to you, when you think we would be advantageous to partner with you, come to meetings, to one-on-ones, come to committee meetings, speak if need be, please feel reach out to us, update us, engage us. If we could help with the message, we will.
Absolutely, and what would be helpful to us as well too is if you guys have, if overall members of the board have specifically strong relationships with not only delegation members but any other legislators in the state where you
Good idea.
have a personal
Yeah,
relationship.
we probably ought to make a list and give that to you.
That would be perfect. Yes,
Okay.
that would be ideal.
Will you give us regular updates? Oh, am I supposed to ask first?
Go ahead.
Will you give us regular updates on the bill? I mean, if there's 100 bills, I don't want to text on
Yeah.
every bill when it moves,
Mm.
but maybe the ones that are with our top 4 priorities
Mhm.
here as they move, on some kind of group email or even individually. I don't know how that would work. But
Yeah, typically what we've done is we give weekly reports on everything going on and updates that are, again, high level, so you're not getting, 100 bill reports, but we do that weekly, and also you get real-time updates as anything significant may happen, and we've flowed that through Michelle primarily, and then she flows it out to the board members, and I anticipate that process Dr. Blackburn with her successor will continue. So yeah, you'll be continually updated on all this stuff.
Other board members? I have just a few things, and I'll try to be quick. On the issue of transportation, just a thought there. Penny, you indicated that we were looking at probably a similar amount or similar gap on our transportation funding. I wonder if we're taking into account the anticipated increase in student numbers. And then my second thing on that, I wonder if there's not an opportunity there, Nick, for us to target, if you will, some areas where we know we may have an agreement. So expanding our corridor busing to support our choice programs in the district. If the state, if state level leadership is eager to increase choice options, perhaps they would be eager to increase funding for transportation to make those choice options available to all students in the district. So maybe just
I was thinking of
good job.
that. I had it written down.
Maybe just one way to approach
Absolutely.
closing that gap on transportation funding.
just one thing real quick. I met somebody from another school district. I think it's Seminole. They actually bus to their charter schools also. So if they were willing, they're so excited about charter schools, let us bus to our choice schools, all our programs. I don't know, maybe that would help with the funding.
We contract, they contracted with us for busing at a point in time, and I forget why we don't do that anymore. But the charter schools would, I'm sure, probably pay Seminole
Yeah.
for that transportation.
They do. They pay a fee with Seminole, for Seminole to provide the transportations. My prior school district did the same thing, provided it when it was paid for.
Also, we have gotten, I believe, the committee appointments and the delegation contact information. Would it be possible for you all to also send out the key staffer contact information for there were a bunch of names that you listed, and I was trying to write them down really quick, but I don't think that I got all of them. On the we kind of touched on the financial literacy course, and then on the decrease in out-of-school suspensions. I love that. I love that we're looking at that jail pipeline. My only comment would be, and this is something that we have to be careful of in every year, one, they don't seem to consider the cost of us implementing the programs, just like with a financial literacy course. I think it's a wonderful thing for districts that don't have a robust JA program to incorporate that into their education. My concern is, one, where do we put it? Because we already have so many other requirements, so we have to take that into consideration, that there's actually room in the schedule to create an additional course if that's our goal. Two, how do we fund it? because rarely do they provide increased funding with these sorts of things. I would love to see funding for things like counseling and social workers at schools. So if we can piggyback with the Psychology Association to put some pressure on that idea, I think that would be wonderful. But I think we have to keep that top of mind, that time and funding to make these things happen is really important. And so while we're having that conversation, I would say that if they would like to provide us additional funding to expand our school day, we would be more than happy to accommodate that as long as they're willing to support us in the process, because there is so much, especially with the focus on accountability and testing, that we're losing the opportunity to teach our students everything from, good character traits and respect and how to balance a checkbook and how to go to the grocery store. And there's a whole lot that is keeping our students from really being life ready, but we need assistance in having the opportunity to really provide those opportunities for our students. And I think that was the last thing, other than if we can really encourage them to consider that RLE. I think in a year when we're looking at a budget turn down, that is a good way for them to be able to achieve some of the great things that they want to achieve in education without really doing an enormous amount of harm for anyone. Any other board members? Okay. Then, next on the agenda is an opportunity for the board to hear about Project 2018.
I'd much rather hold it to keep me from talking with my hands like a crazy woman.
Ms. Archer, before you begin, I don't mean to interrupt you right off the bat, but are you all planning on staying for the Project 2018 discussion? I didn't want you to feel obligated, although you are certainly welcome to join us.
Yeah, I mean, I would like to.
Okay. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Well, again, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share with you this proposal. I've been working on it with a team of people for just barely over a month, so this is very high level. So we're not going to be able to drill down into the weeds. I would also like to respectfully ask that you let me get through the whole presentation, because I may be able to answer some of your questions slide by slide, and then I can take copious notes as you ask questions for improvement. So Michelle's going to be my mad clicker this morning. Project 2018 is a pet name for this project right now before we begin drilling down into any actual details. The concepts are a K-12 concept, but we're going to work backwards. So we're talking about our high schools first. We're looking at a technology preparatory academy that's focused on high-tech, medical, and aerospace industries, which are our biggest industries here in Brevard County. We'll then tailor back into our middle schools. We're going to look at enhancing a robust career exploratory class. This exploratory class already exists in our middle schools, but we're going to give it a shot in the arm, including genius hours, problem solving, coding, and perhaps an aligned project for the students that they might be passionate about. And then going a little further down into our elementary schools, we want to, some of our elementary schools have dedicated science labs, but we want to make sure that all 55 elementary schools have dedicated science technology labs and makerspace. There's a direct correlation to our younger students building collaborative efforts and thinking outside the box, and really just kind of giving them some enthusiasm and passion for their future, and just laying the groundwork as they move through our K-12 processes. Michelle? Our next slide just very clearly outlines our goals. This is a distinct and interrelated design to serve our students and our community. So we're looking at economic development. We are looking at the K-12 work and post-secondary, so whether it be career or moving on for a further educational opportunity, and then coming back to the district. We also need to have a discussion with our workforce as to their current needs and their future needs as well, something they can help us identify. Next slide, Michelle. Through this opportunity, we need to develop a number of partnerships. Our high-tech partners, these are our for-profit organizations. We need their content expertise to come help us move along in our curriculum writing and other opportunities that we need to present to our students. We're going to ask of resources from them, whether it be financial support or in-kind donations, those type of things, and internships for our students. Our next partner is our local government and our legislative asks. So while we may be talking to Governor Scott, we will also be talking to our municipalities to see how much they can assist us. So we, of course, we worked with the Department of Education to make sure our courses fit exactly what our students need. We need the advocacy, and again, we need that support and resources. Our nonprofit partners might be EDC, CareerSource, and others, but we also need their support and their planning and advocacy as well. So these are ongoing conversations with a variety of different people in order to make this Project 2018 come alive. And of course, the last partnership being us, Brevard Public Schools, and we have a huge investment in this. We need to look at our curriculum and instructional design within this particular opportunity. We need to look at personnel, professional development for our facilitators. How are we going to market it? What are our facility needs? And what are our digital needs? So the first thing that we want to ask is for our first year to have a planning year. So we are looking at planning, writing that curriculum, building the professional development between our content experts and our teachers. So an entire year will be dedicated to making this design happen the following year. Number two, we need to look at what is our staff salary going to be. In the professional development, how are we going to pay our teachers extra hours to work with us to develop this? How are we going to, are our high-tech partners willing to underwrite positions of the content experts to work side by side with our teachers to write this curriculum? Our third component are the supplies and the equipment necessary to get into the hands of the teachers. If we're going to do a one-to-one type of environment with our students, and we, just as an example, move towards MacBook versus like a ThinkPad, then we need to get those in the hands of our teachers so that they can develop the curriculum as part of that. Whatever we're going to do with our students, we need to make sure our teachers have it. And then the last piece is our research. The research as far as what awesome things already exist out there that we can tap into and bring back and Brevardize, as we're going to call it. So we're going to make it our own. We don't want to buy any pre-purchased programs of any kind because, again, we want to talk back directly to our industries and make it work for them as well. So in our project plan, the first thing I'm working on currently right now is a team of inspired thinkers. I would like to have about a team of 20, 10 from being within Brevard and 10 being business partners. These people are the type who think outside the box. What are our challenges? What excitement can they bring to the table? What are some of their grand ideas as well to really make this cutting edge? The next step is to have a detailed program design. Again, drill down to what curriculum pieces do we want to tackle first? How do we want to make this program look for our students and for our industries? We need a task-based project plan, so we're looking on bringing on board a project manager to keep all of the spokes running at the same time. HR would be involved, facilities would be involved, my office, and so in order to keep all these people organized and moving all in the same direction, we need that project manager to help us stay aligned. Our next one is obviously to get stakeholder buy-ins. The stakeholders are everything from community to industries to parents to legislation to municipalities. I've already, thank you to Matt Susan for getting me out the other night to the EDC, making some connections with some local business partners and having conversations already beginning. And that is really exciting because those are the people we need to help us move this project along. It's a huge project. And then obviously looking at the reverse expansion, starting with the end in mind. What is it that the legislator is going to want to invest in? They're going to want an immediate return. Our immediate return is with our high school students. They're not going to necessarily be interested in funding a kindergarten program because that's 15 years down the line before they bring it back to our economy. So again, reverse expansion, high school, middle school, elementary school. So starting with the high school focus, Project 2018, I want to make this very clear because as I've presented a couple of different times, what Project 2018 is not, it is not a VOTEC CTE focused only program. That is a different aspect of what falls under equity, innovation, and choice under our L3 strategy of program expansion. It is not a traditional classroom. It is very different from a traditional classroom. The criteria-based is gone. This is going to be project-based. A pathway to a specific trade is not this. That, again, falls under a different aspect of my office. So this is, Project 2018 is not a VOTEC high school environment. It's a different type of environment. What Project 2018 is project-based. That's where we need our industries to help us develop those problem-solving activities the children are going to participate in, or I should say young adults actually, are going to participate. It's real-world learning, enough of sit and get and lecture. They are going to be engaged in what they're doing, and they're going to think outside the box. It is very non-traditional. So again, exactly what it looks like at this point in time is up to our crazy and wild imaginations, and such things already exist in our nation, and so we want to tap into some of those exciting opportunities. But it is industry connected. So again, going back to aerospace, aviation, state-of-the-art technology and manufacturing, our health sciences, we want to tap into those industries because those are our biggest industries here in Brevard County. What Project 2018 and the other projects in my office do have in common are work skill development, career exploration, hands-on and engaging, and interest-based. It is the students who will be interested in this that will come forward. So our school model at the high school, we're going to call it right now high-tech prep. That's its little nickname. It's a high-impact learning environment. If you have an opportunity of the old-fashioned classrooms of desks and chairs no longer exist. High-impact furniture looks more like puzzle pieces that can be designed for small group, large group collaborations. If you have an opportunity to check out the Teal Lab at McNair, and if you can envision a horseshoe-sized table with 4 student computer stations and a flat-screen TV on the wall where the kids are not only collaborating with each other, collaborating with schools across Brevard County and other students maybe across the nation. So again, it's engaging opportunities for them to think outside the box. It's taught by a high-tech specialist. Some of these are high-tech specialists are our teachers, but they have to come into this with a total different mindset of how they're going to teach, and they're going to work side by side with our content experts to develop these project-based opportunities for our students. So it might be integration of math and science, reading and or English, and so the social sciences and how they are working together, and they're not working in silos anymore. They're working in collaborative efforts. It is also a soft skill development. Every day the students will be working on various skill sets that our industries are saying our students are not graduating with. Simple things, showing up to work on time before the time clock says they have to be there. How do they dress? How do they write a resume? How do they go about interviewing? How do they network? Teaching them all these type of skills that are very beneficial to their careers in the future. Looking at a cohort model, we obviously want to start small to grow big. We want to start with our 9th and 10th graders, and we want to look at that so that they can build this, the skills and the opportunities through that, eventually leading to a senior project. They is done in a collaborative effort, not an individual effort. So something they may begin their freshman or sophomore year and then tackle their junior and senior years as we continue to add grade levels into this high-tech prep. And a very non-traditional schedule. Long gone would be I believe it's 47 minutes in a senior high bell schedule. Now that they may have 2 or 3 hours in a particular class as they collaborate and work on a project, allowing us the flexibility to design their schedule, but still meeting that seat time requirement for graduation purposes. So that's the innovative concept behind what this high-tech prep could look like. Michelle, next slide. So we have an instructional focus. Again, I reiterate that we're looking at project-based learning that are tied to industry tasks and challenges that are linked to real-world problems. As an example, perhaps, we want to put in front of our students, how would they handle childhood obesity? How could they problem solve? And then work with the content expert from the health field. So when we look at that, what type of experiments could be conducted? What kind of advertising? What type of activities would they put in schools or homes? And again, from a student perspective, answering a real-world problem. Tapping into our content, Can you go back? Tapping into our content experts for professional development, mentoring not only our teachers, but maybe a classroom of students, and then looking at that project development. What does Harris want us to tackle in the classroom, maybe with regard to state-of-the-art technology or manufacturing? These are just examples. Our student opportunities, we need internship opportunities for them to get real-world experience, whether it be sitting also in a corporate professional development opportunity where they might just be passive observers, but watch how engineers get together and problem solve and think out of the box and role play out some challenges that they face in their industry. And also, along with their senior projects, how can we get them out there into these industries so that they could then develop a senior project that actually means something? Next slide. Additional support options. We talked about developing a 501c3 outside of our current organization so that if these corporations wanted to write a check to Brevard Public Schools, it would be specifically earmarked for this project and this project only, so that it wouldn't go elsewhere. Whether they want to sponsor a classroom, and in that design, if the Rockwell Collins wanted to say build or remodel 5 schools' science labs at the elementary level, we would dedicate those science labs to that industry, but giving them the opportunity to also have that tax write-off as well as support our school systems. So it could be twofold because each of these industries have different types of opportunities to help support us. Next slide, Michelle. So our timeline is pretty aggressive. We're looking at a final proposal on May 1, this white paper that I know Dr. Blackburn has spoken of, so that we can have some more details ready and so we can take a look at it. Our second one opportunity is our legislative process, and we want to have that done by June of 2017. And so what would we take to the Senate, the House, and the legislators at that point in time, and the governor? Year 1, looking at planning and developing. How would we work with our teachers? How would we plan to write curriculum? There's a couple of different examples of professional development. Would we pay for teacher salaries to come out of this high school? Wouldn't be a lot of teachers, but a few teachers to come out and just pay their salary for a year as we write the curriculum and we train them. Or would it be 2 intensive summers of 10 weeks each summer, paying them a salary, again, to develop this? These are all just ideas that the team of inspired thinkers will get together and decide upon. In year 2, we'd like to have a high school pilot implementation. We want to start small and grow big. I've already said that once. Ideally, we'd like to get this in all of our high schools, but we need to make sure we're doing it right the first time. So we're targeting 2 strategically placed high schools in the district. Of course, we're a challenge district, being 72 miles long with barrier islands, and we want to make sure that in light of the fact that we do not have corridor busing, we want to at least make it accessible to the highest percentage of our students. And then years 3 and 5 look at expanding it at our high schools. Do we want to add 2 high schools, 4 high schools, all high schools? Where are we at in our mission and our accomplishments and our supports? And then ultimately also in that same time frame, look at our elementary and middle school implementation. Our elementaries and our high school carry capital expenses. Our middle schools may be more just curriculum changes and opportunities for field trips and those type of things, so may not be quite as costly as the elementary and the high schools. So our high-tech partners that we are looking at, aerospace aviation, state-of-the-art manufacturing, and our health industries, all making our students career-ready students, whether they walk out of high school right into the work field or whether they go on for further education and then come back to Brevard. So interrelated financial plan. The partners, the high-tech, the nonprofit, the legislative asks, and BPS could actually be estimated up to a $25 million ask. If you include all of the capital changes, the programs, the supplies, the staffing salaries, PD, ultimately could be that much, and that's pie in the sky as this whole project is. Those are not the nitty-gritties budgetary items. I've had conversations with Dane about how much it would cost to renovate a couple of high school arenas, what it would cost per elementary school classroom to renovate and make science labs. These are prices today. If we get it off the ground in 2 years, the prices will be very different. And also, what is the innovative opportunity that we want to offer Brevard Public students? And then, of course, I'm the contact person for this project. Questions?
Thank you, Ms. Archer. Questions from the board members? Questions, comments? Mr. Craig?
Thank you, first of all. It's awesome. I appreciate the effort you put in. And so when I say effort, the first question I have is, are you already quantifying the effort that you're putting into it now? So, I mean, it takes your time. It takes the time of others. Are you quantifying that now so that we can track that along the way? Because, you know, in the past when we've started programs, we haven't maybe put a stake in the ground and said, hey, this is where we started, and this is what's coming out of Hyde, and how much it's actually costing along the way?
I haven't just yet.
Okay.
I can tell you it's probably been, my schedule's pretty wacky with regard to how many hours I spend out in the community and having meetings, probably taking at least 25% of my day.
Yeah, so I
to
think
do
it's just, as it starts to expand
Yes.
and grow, that we can quantify that, you know, certainly when a project manager comes along, that they'll be able to do that, but that might not be for a while. So I think you touched on looking at similar successful programs,
Yes,
either
sir.
in-state or out-of-state. Do you have any specific
Well,
places that
specifically,
you've seen?
Buck Institute is a wonderful opportunity that provides training in project-based learning. And there is a series of high schools called New Tech High, started in Sonoma Valley, California, and there are several around the nation. Again, project-based, portfolio-based for student achievement. And coincidentally, this June, the Buck Institute is in Sonoma Valley holding a conference. So I would like to take perhaps a small team of people there, and I say small, maybe 6, because the way the Buck Institute lays out their training, there's district visionaries and then there's staff.
Right.
So how they train the teachers for this and how they train district personnel. Also, there's a recent study from the educational source related to makerspace, and I believe it's Fresno State that does a fantastic job. So again, out there kind of trying to spend our time wisely to look at a variety of different opportunities.
Cool, I like that. Although I lived in Fresno, and if you want to visit there, go ahead.
Well, it's one of the California State universities. I want to say it's Fresno. I'd
Just
have to
kidding.
go back and reference.
So, and I think you'll probably do this, but one of the things that I think is critical when you start talking to industry and you start developing the program is how we measure how we measure our success along the way. And so, what are the milestones? What are the metrics along the way? And establishing those early on so that we understand that when we report back to those industries and those partners, you know, in the quad chart that you had there, that everybody understands, you know, this is what we've done, and this is how we're measuring it, so that when we give them those reports, they understand it. And I think that would be part of.
Yes, I agree.
With
And,
that
part of my
development.
audience with them is asking them what is it they see that we need to work towards.
Okay.
Because I need to ask them, what type of student do they want? What skill set are they looking for when they're hiring potential employees? That's that conversation, that audience that I'm eager to get to right now in order to develop this the right way.
That's awesome. And then the last question is how does this complement existing programs? I don't know, like Da Vinci or the O'Galley, you know, aviation programs. How do you see this? Is it completely separate? Do we start integrating it? How does that work?
Well, right now it's completely separate. I see it as a school within a school, so a high-tech prep within, say, 2 of our high schools that are geographically and logically located. I don't want to detract from what we already have going
Right.
on, because ultimately the Da Vinci Academy, which is an engineering academy in the aviation, could be absorbed into this high-tech prep. But also there are students who just want that opportunity outside of any type of their core activities. So I hate to say it, it's kind of in two different places right now, depending upon how the inspired thinkers see it. But in my mind, it's a school within a school.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Mr. Ziegler.
Starting off and dovetailing with our legislative conversation, we need to get something fairly accurate, I think, on the table in our conversations right now as we're starting to talk to legislators. And I realize that we want to make this Brevardized, and we want to come up with some details. I'm thinking we need to look at some similar models that exist and beg, borrow, or steal their designs, their plans, their cost estimates, just so we can get some conversation on the table right now. Obviously, we'll tweak this because we probably don't expect to get anything this session, but we need to start somewhere. And I don't, and that leads me into my next point, Dr. Blackburn. I just don't see the capacity in Mrs. Archer's department for putting the time and effort in that's needed to make sure that this flows as expeditiously as possible. She's saying 25% of her time, which I didn't think she had enough time to do her job in the first place. So we need to make sure we have enough resources in that department for this to stay on track. But that's just a concern. I've always had my concern about that department, and I do now, because we need to get some stuff done quickly to help us have this conversation with our legislators. And I don't know if you all feel the same way, but I'm just very concerned about the crunch and the time availability.
Truth be told, when Mr. Craig asked the question about the time, yeah, I do think about the time that her very limited staff is putting into this right now against some of her other objectives. So that's definitely something that we need to look at. From a resource allocation perspective, my plan is that Brevard Public Schools needs to be the first one to invest in this. That means reappropriating our current resources and then moving to our local government, municipalities, and perhaps even the government. We have had very preliminary conversation with at least one municipality. I don't want to call them out, but the whole notion of them investing in us after we invest in ourselves. And so at the end of the day, there would be a conversation we take to Tallahassee where Brevard Public Schools has already reappropriated and invested resources into this. Locally, we've received government and private entity investment, and now there's a gap to get us from where we are currently to where ideally we'd like to be. And so backtracking, the Brevard investment absolutely has to start with resources that we dedicate.
So, Mr. Ziegler, I haven't come up with the actual budget, but we're preliminarily getting some data. If we do an entire new capital wing in one of these high schools, it's upward of $5 million. If we do renovations, it's around $2.5 million. These are things I'm gathering. Science labs are run around $250,000 at the elementary level to renovate and supply. So these are conversations I'm having with Mr. Theodore. I'm also having conversation with HR. What is it going to look like to pay these teachers for their PD? So we're collecting these things, and I see a budget, as Dr. Blackburn and I have talked about, with three components: BPS, local entities, and then the legislative ask. We're not there yet because we have to continue to drill down.
And not to add more towards your busy schedule, but I don't think this board wants to see this be a all or nothing with the legislature. So we need to also have that simultaneous plan on what we can do if we do fall short on our desired revenue for this.
Do that.
Ms. Deskovich, any comments or questions? Mr. Craig, anything else?
No, ma'am.
As an aside, I want to mention it before I forget, Dr. Blackburn, if you could please share, and I meant to say something while our Capital City folks were still here, but this type of program, I think, speaks very loudly to the reason that per student station funding restrictions are problematic. And so I would encourage that as we're having those conversations with our legislators, that we also point out how that per student station funding restriction limits our ability to really create innovative program spaces and innovative programs along the way. If you look at the number of students that are in the average makerspace, for example, compared to the average number of students that would be in that same square footage in a classroom, it's drastically different.
Yep.
And I think that our legislators need to understand the impact of their scrutiny on how much we're spending per student station so that we can continue to look at creating environments that help our students to really learn.
And Ms. Belford, one of the things I didn't present was an innovative center within this school where there's a lot of creative collaboration. For lack of better terms, Googleized, where there is some amazing just space for makerspace labs, kids to come together and really think outside the box.
I think that is incredibly important. And I was so happy to hear you talk about the funding for staff salaries, because one of the comments that I made when you were on the previous slide was, can we reach out for, supplemental sponsorship from our community partners for those sorts of things? The other comment that I made was, will we have any flexibility and requirements for our instructional personnel in those programs so that we could potentially encourage industry experts to participate in the programs?
So what I see with the industry experts is almost an underwriting of a corporation to pay for their expert to work side by side with our teachers. So instead of being assigned maybe to their current location, they would be assigned to this high school, working with the teachers, working with the students, developing the programs. So that we don't necessarily, because one of our challenges are paying these industry experts at the level in which they earn in their private industry as opposed to what they would make as a public school employee.
Right.
And that's a huge challenge for us. So we want to make sure that we can do that collectively.
If I could add to that, so some of our legislative asks will be of a financial nature, but some may be of a policy nature. So to your point, we may need flexibility in the definition of a certified educator. We may need flexibility in how that educator is evaluated, right? And so both of those things may be cost neutral, but in our current environment, pretty controversial, I would guess, but we'd still make that ask.
And I think we could make a strong case for some leniency there. And as an aside, something that you may want to look at in having those conversations, Ms. Archer, and Rob Raines would be a good one for you to talk to about this, Dr. Blackburn. When I worked at United Way, they have what they call a loaned executive program. And they actually have people that send employees during their peak times to work alongside the United Way staff in order to accomplish the things they need to accomplish. So that might be a good structure, if you will, to take a look at to see how we get there. The other comment that I have, and I understand that this is not a VOTEC or CTE focused program, and I understand the reason that it's not. The only thing that I would comment on that is I think that it is really important that as we go through this process, that we really evaluate our CTE programs to determine maximum impact. I think, and we've had this conversation before about being careful what we measure. Are we measuring the number of people that are completing with certification, or are we measuring the number of people that are completing with certification and getting an employment as a result of that certification? And if they're getting employment as a result of that certification, are they getting employment as a result of that certification in the field in which they're certified? So moving beyond just the number of students completing CTE programs to really look at where we have, where we're truly making an impact for students, and perhaps in looking at which of our CTE programs are most important, we could free up some resources, whether it be human or financial, from CTE programs that are not necessarily achieving the impact that we desire, and incorporate some of that focus into our Project 2018.
Also, again, some of those things that we were looking at when we were talking about the courses for the students, they may be taking engineering, design, drafting, and achieving those same certifications that you would in an isolated CTE program. We are just not calling it as a separate CTE. So there are opportunities for them to earn those industry certifications that will lead to employment, or at least allow them to explore those opportunities and know what they'll need to do in their post-secondary opportunities as well.
Got it.
If I may touch on that, because I agree 100%. Dr. Blackburn and I have talked about what I would call relevance of establishing a successful career. after high school, because we have, to my dismay, found we have CTE programs that we implement because they stick a feather in our hat, and they generate revenue for us, but may not have relevance to that student's success. And that's not right. It needs to be student-centered, not district-centered. So yeah, we need to look at all of that and adjust accordingly.
Thank you. Just a clarifying question. You indicated, Ms. Archer, that the $25 million was your estimated up to $25 million, and then you said something about whole project, but it wasn't whole. Can you just clarify for me, are we thinking that initial startup money needed is 25 million, or are you thinking 25 million gets the entire program implemented, or?
Because I have not actually come up with a budget, that's a ballpark figure. If we start with 2 high schools, we're already talking $5 million just in capital plans. That's not then the teacher salary and other things. So it's just a starting point. Originally, when I put this on the PowerPoint, it was a much smaller figure. But again, we want to go for pie in the sky. And because I don't have it drilled down to the specifics yet, I don't want to estimate too far under the original ask. Because again, how many elementary schools need makerspace and science labs is going to make a difference on that. So Mrs. Klein has given me that information, and again, we can decide how many schools we're talking about eventually getting to. And then what happens in the first year versus the expenses in the second year versus the expenses in year 3 to 5.
So this $25 million figure, and I completely understand it's just a ballpark,
Yes,
but is
ma'am.
it ballpark on startup? Or is it ballpark on completion of
No,
program vision?
it's ballpark on completion of vision.
Okay.
But again, it depends on your actual, when we break ground or we start these renovations. If it's 2 years from now, capital monies may be very different.
I think that number needs to be a lot bigger.
Okay. Well, see, I was trying not to be too greedy.
I was gonna jump in. She was a lot lower and ultra-conservative, and I said, no. I said, you need to be a little higher. It's better to back down along the process than it is to try and stress over creeping the number up. So, see?
I can change it. No biggie.
Any other board comments or questions?
Other than you're giving Penny a heart
Heart
attack. She's got her hands in front of her face.
We're shooting for the, what is the saying? You shoot for the
the-
star,
shoot for the moon
and you
if
land
you-
in the stars?
Well, we haven't yet had our conversation yet, so this is all.
Hey, Merry Christmas.
I figured the worst answer you could get is no.
And
It doesn't
see,
hurt to ask.
I think that's how we have to work. And
Yes.
if we have a much bigger number when we go out and show, look, you can be a small part of this, and we're going to continue to have those conversations and expand on our partnerships to get to that figure. I am certainly not suggesting, Ms. Zerker, that the district can come up with those funds. But
And we
I
know
think we can
walking
get
in
there.
with the legislative ask, we're not going to walk away with the total sum, so we're going to shoot beyond that and
Exactly.
be happy with what we get.
Yes, absolutely.
But if I could, this should be the kind of initiative that the board and the public begins to see as a thread that's being woven throughout everything we do as an organization. So some high-level pieces, when we present our technology strategic plan, you should see Project 18 identified in there. When we finalize our capital plan, I may be pushing the envelope here. I know we're coming up in January, but if not explicitly there, then at least a question mark with a to-be-continued conversation when it comes to our capital dollars. And I would venture to say that around the entire senior cabinet, all facets of the organization, there should be some level of reappropriation. If this is this big of a district-wide initiative, there's going to be some level of reappropriation anywhere, so we're not relying on either Penny finding new dollars or the state giving us new dollars. And then last but not least, I'd be remiss if I didn't just put a couple of exclamation points, and it's already been mentioned. I will need to bring to the board's attention in the next few months just human resource adjustments for Mrs. Archer's department in order for us to establish a good foundation to get this work done.
Ms. Deskovich.
It's kind of out of what we're talking about a little bit, but Dr. Blackburn, when you and I met, we talked about the cost, figuring out the cost of the secondary school of national prominence, what that's costing our district. I'm a little unclear on exactly what that entails. It entails some CTE programs, I think. It entails 2 extra credits, some random things. I'm just wondering if we do an evaluation of that, if we find that's not necessary or is necessary for our district any longer, if that's a place to really reappropriate a lot of our resources, as you say.
Yep, we can do that evaluation.
Yeah, I've asked for that for a while. Still waiting.
And one of the conversations that I know I'm having with RB, and I'm doing a think tank, and I know Andy asked, but corridor busing or busing of some sort is an issue. For every student in this district to have an opportunity such as this, we need to consider reinstating that or something along those lines, which is another expense. But not everybody will have this opportunity right away that's in their own backyard but may have an interest.
I think as we start having the conversations about reallocating the resources, I think that mentality that you just brought forth, Ms. Archer, is really important to keep in mind. Looking at, although we want to be laser focused on accomplishing the goals of Project 2018, I think we also have to be sure to be looking globally at the other aspects of the strategic plan and how they all fit together. Because as we discussed, potential clusters within the district and that sort of thing, I think there's a lot of overlap in concepts and high-level vision of where we're going. I just want to make sure that we're not looking in silos as we get there. So going back to my recommendation to be sure we evaluate CTE while we're looking at this, and Ms. Deskovich and Mr. Craig's request to look at SSNP while we're doing that, I think we can accomplish it if we really step back and take a good look at all of those different elements. Anything else? Okay. Dr. Blackburn, any comments from you in closing?
No, I think I'm good. I appreciate the board and staff's attention to this matter, and we're looking forward to rocking and rolling.
Excellent.
Happy holidays to everyone if we don't talk tonight at the board meeting.
You as well. And this meeting is adjourned.